Louis Reyes McWilliams. How good to have you here.
Hey man, good to see you. Good to be here.
Yeah, this is fun. I'm excited to talk to you about the broad theme of character and acting, and being the person that you are, thoughtful, well read, and currently embarked in the projects you're embarked on. I think it'd be awesome to have this conversation. Why don't we start with Louis? What are you up to? What are you working on right now?
Oh my gosh, yes, a lot of things. I'll start by saying I'm an actor and a writer, and now moving into being a director as well. And I've got sort of two projects going on. The first is that I'm about to leave for Atlanta. I'll be in Atlanta for 2 months, and I'm working on a new play there. It's a new adaptation of A Tale of Two Cities, the Dickens novel, with a playwright who I really like. He's a young guy who's done what I think is a pretty good adaptation that focuses a lot on like the French Revolution and parallels to today. Um, I'm playing one of the lead roles, so I'm excited about that. So that's sort of coming up. I'm prepping for that. And then the other thing is I'm working on this short film that I will be directing, that I wrote, that I'm also acting in, um, wearing a lot of hats that I'm also producing and fundraising for. And that I will be shooting Easter weekend, actually, so end of March, and then sort of keeping on into that process.
Is there stuff you can share about the movie so that people have an idea of what kind
Yes,
of
yeah,
art
absolutely.
you're interested in creating? Yeah.
Yes. It is what I've been calling like a family dramedy about a young widow who invites her former brother in law to her family's Christmas Eve dinner. Um, and the complicated relationship that they have kind of plays out over the course of the night in front of this family. It's something that is at first just sort of supposed to be there for like as support and both of them helping each other through their grief, and then kind of begins to turn into like something perhaps a little more intimate, and they have to kind of deal with their reckon with their feelings for each other. And um, yeah, that's what it's about. I've really been inspired by the movies of Alexander Payne, who just did The
Mm,
Holdovers, which is out right now. I really love, and
mm,
Silver Linings Playbook, and I really love like character driven human movies. I get inspired a lot by like movies of the '70s and just things that are really human stories.
mhm.
Uh, so yeah, it's a short that's kind of focusing on that, draws from my own experiences growing up and um, Christmas Eve dinners in my family, which were, part of my family is Italian, and so we do a feast of the seven
Mm.
fishes every Christmas Eve, um, and sort of takes that environment and runs with it.
Wow, I didn't realize it was that close to that episode of The Bear. The
Yes,
Seven
yes,
Fishes,
that's
and
a great
oh
cop.
my goodness, yeah.
Yes, very similar tonally, but that is a very different family than the one that I've
Mhm.
written. I
Yeah,
would say
yeah.
which not hard to do. They're super intense, and this is a little. Um, I'm interested in I guess more vulnerability from the characters
Mm,
that I'm writing, and something a little softer and sort of more internal, interior.
mm,
But I
mhm,
love that show, and I love that
mhm,
episode in particular. I've watched it a lot in preparation
mhm.
for this.
That's so cool, and I wanna. So the reason I've been really fascinated by the concept of character and the idea of um, not just in the literal or literary sense, where there's a fictional entity somewhere that we pretend exists in the world, but also in the personality, the concept, like character and embodying a certain persona and the sort of more somewhat more metaphysical thing of like we are people who have a character in our minds and we play those characters. And I think it'd be really interesting to explore the lens of, okay, but if you set out to act and if you set out to learn the methods and skills and the industry and the storytelling and all that stuff, what do you find out about yourself in the process? And so I wanted to like go back to you, to your beginnings as an actor and as an artist,
Mm.
maybe high school, and what was your thinking around acting back then, and what drew you to it, and what were the key factors that said, okay, maybe there's something here.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, character is such a great uh, question because I actually do think that was what first excited me about it was all theater, it was all sort of like plays when I was a kid and doing those in school. And I think really what it was the opportunity to like inhabit another person's psyche, another person's shoes. I wasn't like, thinking about that when I was in middle school necessarily of like, ooh, what is this character's like psychological motivation? But like just the ability to express myself in a way that was sometimes larger than life or sometimes true to life. Um, it was like an outlet for that, right? For expression. Um, and I always loved as a kid, I was always doing like comedies and like I remember we did a bunch of French farces at my high school. And I love those because you can sort of really bring a lot of expressiveness and size and to that. Um, yeah, it's funny. I think a lot about like, and we talk about this in writing too, but I've thought about it more and more as an actor that character really is behavior in many ways. Like, how do
Mm.
you behave? Um, and that is a big umbrella that contains a lot of things. But I think that's when I was younger in particular, I was interested in like, oh man, this person behaves so differently than me in the world. And
Mm.
I get to just like embody that for a second. How
Mm.
exciting! Because I was kind of shy and I wasn't really super outgoing and super um, like boisterous, and so this sort of felt like an
Mm.
opportunity to like let that person out, who I think was very much like in me, and I sort of always wanted that outlet.
And how was it having the right outlet? I mean, like you found characters that you were excited about expressing. But I could also imagine, kids out there who are in high school and probably like look at the play that the school's putting on and maybe don't find a character that they resonate with, or maybe don't, necessarily click in those early stages. What do you think are some other alternative um, the vehicles for people to start thinking about this stuff or start getting into it, even if like the impressions that they get from the characters they see at an early age aren't the ones that attract you and would rather
Hmm.
pull you away.
Yeah, I mean, as you say that, I do feel. I mean, even just in retrospect, I'm like, oh man, I was pretty lucky to be able to like, um, even in high school and in middle school, to get to do some roles that I like. Even if I didn't connect personally, I got to like feel, oh my gosh, what an opportunity to express myself in this. So part of I'm a professional actor, but something else that I do is I am a teacher with this program called Beyond the Page, which is about bringing theater into non-theater classrooms. Um, so
Hmm.
we'll bring sort of like techniques that whether it's like building a character or play analysis, into, and we do it at the college level. So it's into like political
Hmm.
science classes, anthropology, like all these things that you wouldn't. We went to an econ class last semester,
Hmm.
things you wouldn't think would be theatrical. And we have this saying that's like, not everyone needs to be an actor professionally, but everyone should act, which I really think is like,
Hmm.
everyone should do art. Like everyone,
Hmm.
it should, whatever it is. I think everyone's like creative. Um,
Hmm.
that's just sort of instinctual in us. And that even if it's not right, talking about like, if you're not, if you're in high school and you're not like getting characters that you're like, yeah, I really feel that I can do a lot with, this tiny part or whatever. Like, what are the other outlets that you have? I remember I would like
Hmm.
draw in high school, and I love to like um, dance. I wish I had sang more. Like, I just finding those places where it's not where you're not being asked to like just sort of regurgitate information, but you're actually being asked to like interpret something and
Hmm.
look inward and bring some of yourself. Uh, I think that's invaluable. Um, yeah, I also think every character has something where like, even if you are playing a four-line role, you can find something in that that you relate to, or that you can
Hmm.
express something about that person.
Hmm.
So that's always kind of a fun game for me.
And I want to double tap on the concept of interpreting, because I think it's very easy to overlook the subtleties of acting and the interpretive nature of it. Like most of the time we consume fiction or we consume media, and there's a pre-portrayed element of the I don't know, like let's say an interpretation of Batman, and so we think Batman is this type of way, um, but it really is interpretive. Like we don't the music is Mozart is the sheet music. It's not the thing that we hear on the on Spotify. And so, but then that begs the question, okay, how do you even begin to interpret a character, right? Like you get four lines, or you get you get some projection from the writer into the page, and then you have to
Mm.
extract that out and sort of. And so let's start there. Like, how do you extract it out first?
Yeah. This is all great. This is like what I'm doing all the time. I mean, I'm prepping for the show, and it's like that's everything that I'm working on right now. Jessica Chastain talks a lot about like being a detective. That really great acting and preparation starts with like reading the script and reading the lines over and over and over again. And it's about like, what do you that because that's all you have, when you're an actor, like all you have is the information that is on the page. Um, and so the big questions that I ask are like, what does my character say? Um, what does he say about himself? And what do other people say about him? Um, and those are like pretty simple categories to start with, but you can learn a lot just from sort of those things of like, how do people speak about this person? How does he speak about himself? I think that's a really good place to start with the text. I think the other thing that I'm always thinking about is it's sort of you're coming at it from both sides. Like in acting, we talk a lot about like what is it to be an actor who's works inside out versus outside in, and
Hmm.
by that we mean like actors who start from an emotional truth versus actors who maybe start from like how does my character move? How does this person like move through the
Hmm.
world? Lead with their hips? Do they lead with their head, um, their heart, those sorts of things. And that's different for every role. Like sometimes I'll be like, I know
Hmm.
exactly how this person moves, and that will give me a whole I will like unlock a walk, and I'll be like, great, I
Hmm.
know who this person is now. Sometimes on the other hand, it will take a ton of just like emotional work, and the most nervous I get is when I read something and I'm like, I don't know how I connect to this. I've never had this
Hmm.
experience. There's so many characters. Most characters I play, I've never, the guy I'm prepping for right now, is like a French
It-
aristocrat in the 1780s. I have no idea what it is to experience that. But there's a scene he has where he confronts his uncle. And I'm like, okay, I do know what it is to confront a family member about something. And so you start to draw these parallels in experience and substitutions you start to make. And um, Meryl Streep has a quote that I love, where she's always asking on every character, like, what do I know about this person that no one else does? Like, what is something that I know about this experience that only I know? And I think that immediately makes it um, personal to you. Because on the flip side, right? Like, I'm sorry, I'm just kind of name dropping, but this is how I
Go
haven't
for it.
worked
Yeah,
with
yeah.
any. It's not really name dropping, but I read a lot. And Philip Seymour Hoffman used to talk about like he always starts from a place of assuming and knowing that this character's experience, this other person's experience, is different from his. That like no, obviously this is a different person who
Hmm.
experiences the
It's
world in a
not
different.
you. Yeah.
It's not me. And so I'm always kind of working on those two axes. Like, how is this
Hmm.
person different from me? But also, how are we similar? Because I think that's the only way that you can build a character while maintaining a level of like truth and
Hmm.
humanity.
Oh, it's so interesting, and I feel like you could just get lost in the internals of it, just trying to figure out, okay, which part of this, and then you map, your story to a character's story, and it's like not a perfect mapping, but it's enough to appear on screen or on stage for the exact amount that it needs to, and then you figure out, okay, wait a minute, but who am I in the process? I wanted to ask you about another layer of interpretation that is the cooperative aspect of it.
Mm,
So you know how you can have 1,000 different reads on a character, or 1,000 billion different reads on a line. particular delivery of a given line. How do you reason around trying to be as truthful to the picture that you've built based on the words on the page versus the picture that other people may be forming based on their reading of what's on the page? A
Mm.
director, a producer, another cast member.
Um, no, it's a great question. I mean, it's what I deal with every time I enter into a rehearsal process. I think ultimately it always comes back to the text. It always comes back to what's on the page. Um, and it's a collaboration, right? So the director is there as an outside eye, and there's someone who, I only know what I'm experiencing internally, but I don't necessarily understand how it's being perceived all the time. And so the director is there to tell me, hey, this is how it's coming across. And so then I can kind of go back under the hood and make changes to be like, okay, maybe if I try it this way, it will come across in a different way. Or the most infuriating is when a director is like, hey, we need you to be more vulnerable here. And you're like, I was already doing that. What do you mean? There's moments where you're like, you think you're doing something, but you're not actually doing it as much as you thought you were. So, um, no, collaboration is the whole thing. I think ultimately you have to have the confidence and have done the work, the preparation to be like, at the end of the day, I know more about this character. I'm an advocate for my character and for the person that
Mhm.
I'm playing. And ultimately, I'm going to know more about him than the director. The director is going to understand the bigger picture better than me and is going to be able to tell me, hey, I actually need you to change what you're doing there in the story because even though it feels truthful, it totally undercuts this moment that's going to happen 3 scenes later, or it doesn't make sense in the arc of what your character is experiencing. Um, so they're there to sort of mold and shape. Um, but I think of it as like I come in with a bunch of ideas and with an understanding of who my character is. And then the director is kind of the sculptor. I'm sort of the stone, and the director is there to
Mm.
be like, to kind of start eliminating possibilities. Um,
Mm.
to say like, um, really interesting choice. Don't think it's right for this scene. What's something else
Mm.
that maybe this character would be doing or feeling in this moment? And then it's my responsibility to make that work. Um,
Mm.
so it's tricky. I mean, I've had I do think good collaboration, friction creates heat, and so I
Mhm.
don't believe in being in rehearsal rooms where everyone just kind of agrees on things all the time. I
Mm.
do think it's healthy to say, actually, I think my character would do this, and here's why. Um, because I think that gets you, once you have to justify it, it brings you to a more personal place. Um, but yeah, it's definitely it's part of the beauty of what I do
Mm.
is that it can't just be coming from me. It is about the whole picture. But again, there's
Mhm.
those things where like to dovetail back in your last question, like there's those personal things that only I know. And I do think of
Mm.
acting very much as like sharing my secrets without actually having to share my secrets, if that makes sense. That like
Mm.
I am infusing it
Mm.
with all of my personal experience without actually having to tell you, you know, I'm feeling very vulnerable right now because
Mm.
this is making me think of this other thing, you know.
Right.
Um, and the director doesn't know that either. They're just sort of so you bring that stuff and they kind of help you shape.
Hmm. No, that's so cool. And I had like I guess it goes to this idea of like injecting yourself into the character, right? Like it is a rendition no one else can do, but because you're committing to putting the stuff that you want to express via that vehicle in that vehicle. Um, And I was also going to ask you. So I'm thinking of the different interpretation styles between theater and film, where I mean I'm sure there's infinitely many, but the one that came to mind just now is that in theater, at least you can sort of reset the blank slate of the character's personality. Like they start here, and then we're going to go through these 2 hours together, and then the character is going to end at this state. And so like you sort of just have you remember the initial state, and then you remember the end state. And because it all happens chronologically. But in film, you're all of a sudden doing takes of like that are anachronistic, right? Like, oh, at this point, the character doesn't know this other thing yet, and so like you have to remember that that's the state up to that point, and you're
Mm.
constantly bouncing around between scenes. So how does just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Like, what are other differences, or what are some aspects about that particular difference that stand out, having done both theater and now doing movies?
Yeah. Oh man, this is great. I love talking about this because this is we're really getting into like my nerdy. I love talking about acting brain. I there's an enormous difference. Um, it's almost like yes, they call it two different mediums, but I imagine it's kind of like if you're a painter, painting with acrylics versus like charcoal drawings or something. Like
Mm,
it's so different. The main thing to me in theater is that like yes, you have your scene partner, who's whoever you're doing the scene with, but you also have the audience, and the audience is that sort of third scene partner, secret ingredient. And so when you begin the show, I often think of theater as like the high dive. I am
mm,
at the top of the show. I'm backstage. I can hear the audience murmuring with excitement, hopefully with some kind of energy. There's you can
mm,
feel energy in the
mm,
theater, which is different on different nights. And you have to not to get too woo woo, but you have to kind of open yourself up to that
mhm,
and receive that and allow that in, and that is going to fill your performance and imbue it with something on that night. And you're also allowing that to imbue that full journey that night. So you're backstage, and like I said, it's a high dive. You're kind of looking out, and you're like, all right, as soon as I step out from the wings, I'm in it. I'm in it, and there's no going back. And I'm taking the ride. I trust that I've done the preparation, um, and I'm listening not just to my scene partner, but also to the audience and how the story is impacting them. And that might change how my character is responding that night. I don't think that's any. It's not just about like I'm only in my brain this character. It's like I'm also thinking about all these other technical things, and so that is a big difference to me. Having that audience there and that response, especially in comedies, you can like hear them.
mm,
Movies to me are so much more like expressionist painting, and I say that because like um, you will go to work and maybe in the morning you're shooting a scene that's sort of towards the end of the movie, and then in the afternoon you're shooting a scene that is like right at the beginning. And a lot of times it is about um, really taking a moment when just before they call action, or when you're on set, to like drop into the emotional stakes of that moment. Like movies are made in moments. Even if you think about the way movies are made, it's like there's editing, there's cuts, it's all shots and scenes. Um, and so you are much more responsible to the moment than you are to like the full story. And so I think about acting in movies so much more as like, how am I just kind of emotionally activating myself and then following my impulses, um, and allowing whatever comes out to come out. Um, Whereas theater, like if I move this chair every night so that in the next scene someone can sit in it, I got to move that chair every night. There's no night where I
mm,
can just say, "Oh, it doesn't feel truthful, so I'm not going to move that chair," because then the
mm.
whole play is screwed up. Um, so that's sort of a broad overview, but I don't know how articulate that even was. But movie acting is so impulsive. It's so much like we're just making 30 seconds of truthfulness. And a
Hmm.
play is to me all about the relationship with the audience. It's all about how is this new for you tonight, and how am I as the storyteller um, responsive not just to my own work and my own emotions, but also to like responsible for bringing you on this ride with us.
And I think there's something to the feedback loop, which you get a little bit of when doing public speaking, or you're trying to tell a joke, and everybody has a feeling of okay, playing the crowd, for lack of a more technical term. And I often think about how weird it must have been for Bo Burnham when he was doing Inside, that he put out a stand up comedy special or whatever that thing is, and did not have the audience to bounce the joke, but back off of, and so. And I don't know which is weirder. I don't know which is more strange. The fact that you can be, you, in a very intimate scene or a very vulnerable scene, uh, is it weirder to be in a crowd, a stacked room, of people who have no business, really being watching that vulnerable scene? By that being, like, there wouldn't be a normal person watching that thing when it happens in the real world,
Right.
versus a more realistic real world setting, but it's just the pretending, or it's just like the infrastructure to pretend. And I can't wrap my head around which one's weirder. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it is. It's definitely a weird thing that I do, and that we do. Just like, we play pretend for a living. Like that's what we do, um, and it is odd to be doing. An intimate can mean all kinds of things. Like just to be doing something vulnerable in front of
yeah.
people. But I think it goes back to that sharing thing that I said. Like theater is about a sharing with a group of people. Um, and I'm have a responsibility as the storyteller, um, to allow you into this moment. And again, I think it makes a big difference for me, going back to the character thing, that like I'm not necessarily, um, it's not me, Lewis, that's doing the thing. Like it is on some level,
Mm.
but my vulnerability is masked. I'm a vessel,
Hmm.
um, for a character, and it's actually this person's vulnerability that's sort of being revealed in this
Mm.
moment. And somehow that makes it, I think, easier to sort of step into
Mm.
those like very intimate, um, moments, because at the end of the day, like you're saying the lines that are on the page, you're not saying, um, the most vulnerable thing that you personally could be saying. It's just kind of imbued with that. Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, even the Bo Burnham
Mm.
thing, we talked about that a lot in the pandemic, and like, um, I think about this a lot, even with, influencers and TikTok and creators. This, and I have to do a lot of self tape auditions, which are when I just put
Mm.
myself on camera on my phone, and I'm reading lines, and sometimes there's not even anyone on the other side. I'm just sort of like performing, into the void, and I think we've gotten a lot more comfortable, um,
Mm.
in the past 10, 15 years, just like looking into the little camera on our phones, and that being an audience or whatever. And
Mm.
I don't really know what to make of it. It's certainly not something that like
Mm.
fills me a lot. I love having, people on the other side of a performance, or some sort of experience. um, but I do think it does allow people to do what you're talking about, to do something really intimate and feel private, even though it is public ultimately.
Hmm. It is fascinating. I mean, the whole, and the generation that's growing up with these tools and these expectations, I think is, I think it's a fascinating thing. I think I'd like to believe that it's all going to work out in the end, but I think like we're really are playing with, like, really we're in uncharted waters in terms of letting a whole generation run free with all of the access to the entirety of human history and having to make meaning for themselves. Um, but and then that got me thinking about all the cognitive stuff that you're doing while interpreting a character. So you briefly mentioned you read the lines on the page, but you memorize the lines on the page, and those lines, like, they're sort of like branded into your heart, and and I wanted to know, like, what other techniques. And you've had formal training in acting, so I didn't have the pleasure to ask you about what types of stuff you learned during an MFA. But what are some of the techniques that you do to do memorization, emotional triggers, things of the sort?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, it's funny because that's such a like it's such an automatic part of my job sometimes, or not automatic, but I just think of it as like, well, you gotta know your lines. But I do. I think for me, if anything, it's not rote. Like it is not like
Mm,
memorizing the answers to a test or something that you'd be like quizzed on a chapter of history. Um, it is much more about looking at the words, um, looking at the lines, looking at the thoughts and the situation. Honestly, that's what helps me a lot. Is like what kind of situation is this like in my life? And once I've connected emotionally, once I've sort of done that thing where I said of like, okay, I've never been a aristocrat in 1780s France, but I have confronted a family member about something before. Then it makes it easier for me to memorize the lines because it starts to have a logic to it. It starts to mean something to me beyond just being words on a page. It's like, oh, this has some personal, or emotional truth behind it. Um, and so that's a big part of it. And I have to be honest, and this is like pretty boring, but it really just is a lot of me in my room on my own speaking to myself, like saying words out loud and just repeating them again and again, and then cursing and being like, "Oh man, I got that wrong," and going back and looking at it and saying it again and again and again. Um, and it's funny, like some stuff is easier to memorize. Like I find
mm,
good writing is a lot easier to memorize than bad writing because good writing has a rhythm to it.
mm,
It has
the
it makes
music,
sense
yeah.
why something comes next. And bad writing is actually really difficult because it doesn't feel like something you would say. It doesn't, have like a beat or a rhythm. It's yeah. So just a
And
lot
what
of
about character
being.
consistency? So let's say, I think this is different for this is wildly different for the stage versus film versus television, but like consistency. You develop a walk for a character you're working on, and what are the mechanisms that you use to not automatically default to your walk when
Mm,
where you're in a scene, so like some part of you has to be like on alert, being like, I am Joe now, I'm not Lewis, and so Joe walks like this.
yeah, it's funny. I mean, it is really. It's a lot of work. It is a lot of work, and I think um, there can often be a perception or an idea that like people just sort of naturally have it or they don't or it's and I don't think that's true at all. I think the first thing that attracted me to acting was I listened to an interview with Paul Newman where he talked about like I never really thought I was any good at this, but I worked at it and I got better, and I think I'm good now. And I was like, whoa, I didn't know that was you could do that with acting.
Hmm.
And that's true to this day. Like if I'm working on a character, it is only because I've spent time, like I said, in my room or in rehearsal, very consciously saying, I'm going to walk differently. I think that the walk feels like this. Um, and then trying that out and then failing and then trying something else. Then maybe the director says, ooh, yeah, that feels like the character. And sort of sticking with it. And once you've had that repetition again and again, then and again, this is where acting sometimes gets a little woo woo, but I think
Hmm.
that's necessary because you're dealing in emotion and you're dealing in something that is bigger than yourself. Um, it is ultimately to me about stepping into something um,
Hmm.
that I don't know that I have like words for it, but that word. I mean, I'm not the first person to
Hmm.
talk about acting feeling like I'm a vessel for something.
Hmm.
For me, my
Hmm.
pre-show routine is all about meditation, breathing deeply, even being in a dark room. I often find very helpful. And sure, I'll
Hmm.
like warm up my voice and all that stuff. Um, but if I've actually done my job, it is a little bit about like I'm going to go let go of Lewis for a little bit, and I'm going to step into this other person and allow this um, person that I've created, but that also exists on the page and um, that has existed in real life at some point to sort of come in and enter into my psyche. Um, I feel like
Hmm.
I sound absolutely insane to people who do not do this for a living, but I really, yeah, I think it's about stepping into another energy, even, and we do it all the time. Like
We do it all the time.
We do it all the time. I mean, it's if you even just think about what you're like when you're home with family and what sort of role you play in your family versus what you're like at home with your partner versus what you're like at work, those are all characters on some level. Those are roles that we fulfill or we play, and you're stepping into a different energy. And I think it's a lot of that's my job as every night to show up, into the theater or on set and allow myself to step into that.
No, and I think it's beautiful. I think there's many layers to there's many layers to my reaction to them. The first one is like, even though it sounds a little on the artsy side, I mean, these are the types of performances that shape the world. Like at the end of the day, I think like it's very easy to underestimate the effect that media and art have in society, and how cultural change can be driven by art, and societal change can be driven by art. Both for better and for worse, I will say. Like,
Mhm.
like propaganda was art of some form, commissioned by the state, and um, but the idea of these let's call them gimmicks that we play, that we do, be it sculptures or paintings, or recordings of music, or interpretations of a given character. I think that there's something to be said about the people in the business of doing that, and whatever methods they use to enact that and exert that power, be it directly or indirectly. I think we should take note of that, right? And I think that you're stepping onto the other pretty crazy thing, that is like, if you're in the business of playing somebody else, and you're letting go of your own ego and letting some other form take over you. Um, and you're also thinking about it, okay, wait a minute, most of us are already doing this in most social situations. There's the final layer that is like, okay, so who writes the characters that we play? Not in
Mm.
a woo woo way, but like, we're probably doing it. Like, I wrote the character that I became by my decisions, and every time I decided X over Y, I am effectively deciding I'm more of an X guy than a Y guy, right? Um, in private or in public, in front of this audience versus this other audience. Um, and I think there's something cool there, and maybe that's like a great transition to talk about your, I want to say, ascension or evolution from acting into writing too, right? Like, even what you were saying about uh, bad characters are hard to act for. So then you're in the business of like, okay, let's create characters, and
Mm.
characters as a vehicle for conveying something. So now you're not just um, in being the canvas through which an entity in someone else's mind is performing through, um, but now you're the one creating the entity too. So now you're playing like the subset version of you, in the current project. I guess not in the current project, but like, well, I guess no, it's true. Like, there's an aspect of you that is coming through your writing as the character that you're playing, and now you're sort of giving your full presence to that. Let's talk about the boundary, and then let's go to the writing. What are your thoughts?
Mm. The boundaries. Say more. What do you
Oh,
mean
the
by that?
boundary between the I guess like between the blurry place between writing and acting, and then
Mm.
before we go to writing standalone.
Yeah. It's funny. There's a saying that like writing is acting in your head, at least for playwriting and screenwriting, because it is that purely creative impulse of um, you're kind of improvising, you're kind of following, you're creating, you're sort of you're playing all the characters, and that's sort of what's allowing you to write. No, I think writing has a lot to do with acting. I mean, I know actors who will create like extensive biographies for the characters that they play, and who will write that out and find that very helpful. And I've done that. Sometimes I don't find it as helpful, and sometimes I do. But it's yeah. I mean, I when I'm an actor, when I'm just sort of like on a play or whatever, I'm pretty strict about like yes, all right, these are the words, and a lot of the plays that I work on have been written for a long time, and so you don't have a lot of say of being like, hey, this doesn't make sense, or
Mm.
this doesn't seem like something I would say. Um, but some of the new plays I've worked on, I have been able to be like, I don't think that I would say this here. I think this would, and
Mm.
that's again goes back to that thing of like feeling like you know the character and being an advocate for your character. Um, so yeah, and I think for me, transitioning into writing, I don't even want to call it a transition because I really, when I was a kid, like I was just telling my partner this story the other day. Like I went to theater camp and they asked us one day, I was in like second grade, and they asked us to write like a 2 minute play. Then we would each put on each of them. And I went home and I wrote 40 pages of a play based on like a video game that I really liked, like a dumb video game.
Hmm.
And the teacher was great. I mean, so supportive. He like put it up, which was incredible. He was like, "Yes, we're going to do it." So I think writing has always been in me. And I surprised myself in college one time. I was like, "Well, I love to act, but I need to write." And I didn't even
Hmm.
realize what I was saying, but I do really feel that way. That like in the pandemic, I couldn't act because theaters were closed
Hmm.
and there were no productions going on and nothing was being shot on TV or film. Um, and so I turned to writing, and that was really what spurred all the writing. And I was like, oh my god, I love this, and I couldn't get enough of it. And it is a fundamental part of who I am now. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
There's something magical. I don't need like that's where I get a little bit woo woo is like something weird starts happening when you start writing things down, and being faced with what feels like an impossible challenge that is the blank page at the beginning. It's just all the potential paths that you could take this little thing that you're doing, right?
Yes, writing is magical. Is there a way to get back into that?
Yeah, yeah, no, no, no. We can just. I'll cut it and start here. But there's something really weird where you get to decide the rules of a certain world and how you're going to grab somebody's attention, and then the implicit promise that grabbing that attention is going to be worthwhile,
Mm,
and that hopefully there's some emotional, uh, personal, very valuable payload that they receive that is, and if you tear down the story, you probably can't find it in any of the given components, but in the sum of its parts, then there's like something special that you've created, and the terror of the possibilities of the blank page. Like, I don't
mm,
think anybody. I think the scary thing about staring at the blank page is not that you don't know what to write, is that you could write so many different things and they were
yeah,
probably going to suck. 99.9999% are going to be noise. um, but somehow you manage to explore, like, out of the infinite possibilities, you start narrowing it down to something that connects. um, and I think there's like incredibly like therapeutic benefit to it, even if it's done in an incredibly creative way, like not necessarily like for a given purpose. Maybe it's therapeutic because there's no purpose. It's just like, just do it because you should do it.
yeah.
um, but how does and then going back to the idea of the boundary, like, so now you're writing characters that you play. How do you reason around that, and how do you find, like, this is the character within the story that I want to play, and these are the attributes that because now you're a layer above, right? Like, you're
Mm,
infusing yourself into a subset of you that you pick to reveal, right? How does that work?
yeah. That's a great question. And even just speaking to what you were just talking about, like, um, I think Aaron Sorkin talks about that. Like a story is the best delivery system for an idea that we've ever come up with, and I think that's
Hmm.
really true. Like there's hopefully an emotional payoff, but I also think that a story can contain so many ideas, even within like the structure of storytelling is something I'm fascinated by.
Hmm.
That is actually, it almost has a lot more to do with science and with how we understand the world and receive story than it does necessarily just expression. So I hear you on that. I think in terms of my work now and like wanting to write characters that I play, this is something I've always wanted to do. Like since I was very
Hmm.
young, I remember. And was saying to people like, "That's what I want to do. I want to write movies that I direct and then I act in. Like that is the dream. That is always what I wanted to
Hmm.
do. And so it took me a while to like get up the courage to really do that. But that's what I'm doing now. I compartmentalize it a lot because I don't write characters going like, ooh, that it would be like I really want to reveal this part of myself, or I really want to act a scene like this. I think to me, it's about writing the thing that I really want to write, um, and writing something that feels truthful and that feels exciting and feels fun for an audience, and also has some um, is expressing something that I want to express, and then trusting that on the other side of that, that I'm a skilled enough actor that I will be able to inhabit or embody whatever it is that I've written. So yes, on some level, like I am including characters where I go like, okay, this is someone who's 20s to 30s, white or white passing Latino,
Mm-hmm.
or someone who shares some physical quality with me that I can embody. But I'm not going. These are the kind of scenes I do well, so I'm going to do this. I'm more going like, this is the
Mm-hmm.
thing that I like to write and that I want to see. Um, there's a great saying like, make the movie that you wish you could go to, that you wish you could see. Like that's more what I'm doing, and then trusting that I'm capable enough to sort of fulfill that objective.
And I have to commend you on the bravery of doing this, right? Because like I feel like you are putting yourself in the incredibly vulnerable position of having creating something that is a mirror of yourself that you're going to be engaging with as both creator and consumer, and sharing the consumer part with other people, and and like having going through a similar journey. I think like it's very easy to underestimate just how vulnerable that is, right? Like you're being exposed to your all your insecurities constantly. You're being exposed to um, all the roadblocks, and sort of like, and then you're doing this thing which I think like is beautiful and noble and wonderful, and I think worthy of praise and success, is like when you actually connect with the other side of the mirror as it's out there, and it's you, and you're like saying the words that you wrote, and like the people hearing them are reacting and like emoting, reacting to the emotion that's being transmitted. um that is like the true reflection, right? Like I
Mm,
think that is the true reflection, truer than what you get in the mirror, truer than what you get alone on camera. And I think um, it's incredible that you're doing it, and I think it's incredibly brave. And I'd look at people like you, like Lin Manuel Miranda, who is in a similar type of enterprise, like being unafraid to cast yourself in the lead role. Like you're also taking on, you're burdening the entirety of the ship on your shoulders, and being able to feel confident enough to do that, I think is just like a tremendous exercise. I wish everybody could feel that confident and go about through life, carrying the ship that is their own identity.
mm.
um, and okay, so then what types of um, stories are you telling now, and are you excited to tell in the future?
Yeah. Well, I'll just say first to your first comment, um, even to be in the same sentence as Lin Manuel Miranda is a great compliment. So thank you for that. Um, I do think that I just want to make the distinction. It's not.
Hmm.
Yes, I do. I do feel a great amount of self assuredness and confidence in my work, and also I believe, and I've come to believe over the course of doing a lot of, really a lot of theater, that confidence is a choice in many ways. It's the same thing as playing a character, right? I don't think most people,
Mm.
maybe some people are naturally like super confident, but I don't know them, or I'm not that person. I think I'm filled with insecurity and anxiety and dread all the time. And hearing you say like, it's all on your shoulders, I was like, keep talking, and I won't even complete the project. No, but it does. It is to me so much more about going like, yes, I am terrified, but I'm choosing to work with that insecurity and with that fear and with the knowledge that it might not work, that
Mhm.
it might not be everything that I think it can be. Um, but I'm still gonna do it. Um, in acting a lot, I think about it like I can't be good in a scene. Me personally, maybe other people can, but I can't be good in a scene if I don't also accept the possibility that this might suck. That I could get out on
Mhm.
stage and like make a new choice tonight that is terrible. Um,
Hmm.
because if I don't open myself up to the bad ideas and the bad impulses, then also the good impulses don't come. And I think it's very similar for just sort of like being at the helm of this project. It's like it's not to me about being fearless. It is
Hmm.
about going, I'm really afraid, but I'm going to do it anyway because I believe in it
Hmm.
and because I believe in myself and I believe in the story. Um, and I want to share that with other people. So that just to make that distinction, because I think that's important for creative people that
Yeah, totally.
we are all super insecure. Even the people who are, the most renowned for doing the thing that they do, I think are insecure. Um, but it's about working with that. Um, and the easiest way for me to overcome that, getting back to your question, is by believing in the stories that I want to tell and by
Hmm.
being super confident and like, yes, this is what I want to share um, with the world. Um, and to me, it took a while to kind of figure that out. And I'm still figuring that out all the time. I have to remind myself that like, you have permission to not just like do one thing. You can tell a lot of different stories. Um, but I am particularly drawn to um, stories of resilience, stories that put us in a hopeful place and that help us connect, um, and help us make us feel more courageous and more brave. I think that springs out of that thing of like, how do we overcome our fear? I think if we all could be less afraid to sort of go out and do the things that we really believe in and that we're dreaming of doing, um, we'd all be a lot sort of happier and more excited by what we're doing every day. And so I'm really attracted to stories of people who are isolated but find community, which maybe comes
Hmm.
from being an only child, um, and someone who like didn't have a built-in community growing up. Um, and in this movie that I'm working on right now, that has to do with like grief and how grief can be isolating and how do you find people who can help you through that? Who are those people? Um, and but I think that's true in all of my stories. It's about um, taking someone who is alone or thinks they're alone and bringing them to a place of feeling more capable than they thought they were initially, and
Hmm.
that has to do with community somehow. Has to do with
Hmm.
uh, love and love and community.
And it's beautiful, and I think that's the kind of message and story that we need more of. I think the world had gotten too plagued with dystopian futures and uh, painting a perhaps deserved, but I think overrepresented picture of the horrors of humanity, and not the miracle that is the good. I think it's
Yeah,
in a
I think that's so right, and I don't begrudge anyone who is Mad Max is a great movie. Like all those movies,
oh
all those things
yeah,
are really.
Black Mirror is awesome. Yeah.
Um, and also, I want to write stories that don't reject that, right? That don't say that the world is perfect or whatever, and it's all, but that go, how do we live full, hopeful, loving lives alongside of that? How do we accept um, the difficulties that we sort of are faced with every day, and also live fully, and also find joy. And yeah, that's sort of where I'm headed.
No, and I love that. And okay, and then there's this other big leap that you made. So not just reading the words on the page, you're not just writing the words on the page, but you're also coordinating the entire process to get the scene to happen, and the you get to say action and cut. Uh, how does that happen? Because that's another. I feel like you're like more and more entrepreneurial or like enterprising endeavors, right? And so, um, how does that leap happen when you go from okay, I have the story, I want to make this happen.
Yeah,
What do I do?
that's just because it's in my nature to be tyrannical and despotic. No, it's it's because the honest answer. There's two things. One is that like I said, I've always wanted to. I think I've always wanted to make movies and direct and be, because particularly film is a director's medium, right? The storytelling is visual. And this is one of the things I didn't say when we were talking about the difference between theater and film. Theater is primarily oral. It's dialogue driven. You that is the sort of primary mechanism of a play. A movie is all about image. It's all about telling story through picture. Um, that's why like silent films are still compelling. Maybe not as compelling as modern movies, but like that's why they were compelling to people, is because it's about motion and it's about um, telling a story in frames. So for me, it was like I want to work in this medium, and this is actually the primary way of doing that is by directing, is by being in charge of like what gets shown in the image. So that's sort of always been something that I've wanted to do and that I'm excited by artistically. The other answer that's really just truthful is that like it's kind of by necessity on some level, that like
Mm.
it's incredibly competitive being in movies and TV. Um, I've always wanted to do this, and also like I want to hire myself. I want to work.
Mm.
I have more to offer than just being an actor, and I would love to, just be an actor
Mm.
for someone else's vision that I believe in. Um, but I have something to say. And so this is the way to go about doing that, and also the way of giving myself a job or two in the process. So it's selfish.
And let
It goes back to being
No, no, no.
tyrannical.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, selfish is, I don't know. I feel like it's like it depends on the framing, right? Like I think like if you see it as art is beautiful and beauty, we should just try and maximize the beauty in the world, then you're essentially just aligning the entirety of who you are with that, which I think is like sure you get to enjoy it. I mean, but also everybody who gets to benefit from the work of art has that to think, right? And in all likelihood, if you don't align yourself just right, um, the thing doesn't end up existing, right? um, and this is like at any level of conception, right? Like this is just even the idea for the story that becomes finalized script, that becomes a storyboard, that becomes so like all the intermediate stages too. It's sort of like the people who consume it are sort of widening, and eventually like you get the broadest access when the work is complete. um, and I don't know. I feel like there's something to be said about that journey that I think resonates a lot with what I'm doing now. That is, um, trying to find all those little gaps in my personality as I try to bring forth a thing into the world
Hmm.
um, that I was either ignoring or I was neglecting or I was like, oh, maybe this is a challenge that I won't get in this life. I won't need to make this pitch, or I won't need to learn how to pitch, or I won't need to learn how to sell something, or I won't need to learn how to write a cold email, or things of that nature. That you sort of in the back of your mind are like, ooh, I'm glad I didn't need to do that. But then when you're sort of in pursuit of something bigger, you're like, no, I need to learn how to do this. Like I can only benefit from learning how to do this. The downside is so small. um, so do you feel like, how do you feel that has manifested for you in the entire production, end-to-end production of this project that you're working on?
I mean, I think yes. I think I dragged my feet on a lot of those things that you're talking about, but it really resonates with me because I spent a long time as an actor being like, oh, I'm so frustrated. I just wish that a project would come along that I would feel really in like, yes, this is a role I want to play. I wish I didn't have to write it myself. And then I said, all right, maybe you should just go write. And then it took a long time to learn how to write and kind of be confident in saying like, yes, I'm a writer. I feel really good. And then now I was an actor and a writer, and I was like, oh man, I wish someone would just direct this thing that I've wrote that I think is really good and that I think I would be really good in. I wish I didn't have to learn how to direct. And now I'm like, okay, I guess I just need to go and learn how to direct. And so that's, um, I was dragging my feet on a lot of those things because it is, and I don't think this is depressing, but it is lonely being an artist. It takes, particularly what I do, it takes other people. It's collaborative inherently, which is beautiful and also frustrating because it means you have to get other people on board. Um, and so a big part of that for me was like, I felt like a one-man band for a long time and felt like that's impossible. I can't learn how to do all those things. And now I'm like, well, if you just start now and then look up in a few years, you'll know how to do it, and then you'll be able to do it. And some of that is youth. You want it to happen like right away. And um, now, it's the same thing with the short, where I was like, man, am I really gonna like direct this and fundraise for it and send out all the promotional materials and get and yes is the answer, and that's been kind
Mhm.
of great to go through that process of like you're more capable than you think, when you
Mhm.
really like push yourself to do it. And again, it goes back to really believing in the project and in the story that you're telling. So I'm kind of grateful for it at the end of the day. I think there were things that I hope I never have to learn how to do that, and that now I'm like, thank God, I had more to give. So thank
Mhm.
God that I learned how to do that.
That man, that's so cool, and I think this is like and it's a baby channel. There's not many of us right now, but like I want to put the link in the description for the fundraising page because I think like that energy that you just exuded about the creation of the film, I think is the same essence in the story of being resilient and finding your community. And so I see the meta parallels like incredibly mightily, having had a chance to get a preview of the script in my privileged position, um, and and I think that's awesome, and I think that's worth celebrating. And whatever little I can do now to help get the message out, I'm more than happy to do. Um, and all right, so what are some other thoughts you have about acting? What are some of the trippier things that you've come across? What are some of the takeaways maybe you sort of like keep in the back of your mind and use a couple times a day just to recenter who you are?
Oh man, I mean, I think. Well, I think there's a lot of basic things. This is why, returning to that thing, not everyone should be an actor, but everyone should act, because the fundamental principles of acting are like being present and listening. And I can't think of two more important skills that you can take to anything that you do. Um, I think it's so easy to get caught up in, what am I going to say next, or what do I want out of this? You're going to get so much more mileage, I find, when you just like are present and decide to listen to what the person across from you is saying and really engage with that. Um, that's been my big thing. I've certainly struggled over my life with anxiety, and with anxiety. And to me, again, it like comes back to that idea of being present. And what does that mean? It means breathing. It means deep breathing often, and just sort of like getting grounded. These are all things that we think about as like good acting. Like good acting is, you're really breathing, you're kind of relaxed, you're present. Um, those are principles that I take with me all the time, and that I think, it's the reason why I think anyone should take an acting class. Is you just sort of go like, just to have a teacher go, hey, stop that. Actually listen to what the person across from you is saying, is a radical act.
Hmm. That is awesome. What a great way to end it. Lewis, thank you so much for your time. This is great. I hope we get to do it again soon.
Yeah, thank you, man. This was so fun, and I appreciate you promoting the project. And always good to chat.
Yeah. All right, man. I'll see you soon.
All right.